Today's the day, my friends. We finally get to welcome into AMD's RDNA 2 lineup the RX 6700 XT. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the high-level specifications as well as the different performance predictions we should be expecting for a bunch of different games. But more importantly, I wanted to do a price versus performance comparison against the RTX 3060 Ti and the RTX 3070 in order to see if AMD's newest graphics card has what it takes to be competitive against Nvidia. So stick around, we're digging into the mid-range. Hey guys, Turk here. I hope you're having a great day. Man, I am so pumped to talk about these graphics cards. We've been covering all the latest graphics cards announcements ever since about September of last year, and we've covered spec announcements, performance predictions, as well as leak analysis. So today we get to finally see all of these graphics cards side by side and just to see what the landscape looks like as we go into 2021. Now, if you haven't watched the AMD press event yet, I definitely recommend hitting pause and going and watching Scott Herkelman talk about all the different features and specs for this graphics card. But in this video, I wanted to talk about the high-level specifications and the performance predictions by game and resolution to give you guys a sneak peek of what you should expect from this graphics card. Now, the 6700 XT is meant to be the spiritual successor to AMD's other popular graphics card, the RX 5700 XT. This is going to be a 40 compute unit based card. It is going to be using an RDNA 2 architecture with the Navi 22 die, so it is a different design compared to the 6800 XT, but it is still embracing that strong RDNA 2 architecture that we've come to know and love. Also with the RDNA 2, we are going to get access to 96 megabytes of that Infinity cache, which unfortunately is less than the RX 6800 XT, but at 96 megabytes, it's still a pretty decent size. And of course, if you've watched any of the leak videos from Cortex, Red Gaming Tech, or Moore's Law is Dead, 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 will be on board for these models. But let's talk about the sweet information and why I think this card is going to be a really good choice, and that is the game clock. The RX 6700 XT is going to have an impressive game clock of 2.4 gigahertz. That is amazing. If you guys have watched my previous leak analysis videos, I've been way off, so I'm really glad that AMD has decided to boost and amp up their frequencies as much as they have. But unfortunately, that does come at the cost of additional wattage for the total board power. According to the spec, it's going to be running at a total board power of 230 watts, which, we had heard on the internet that they were shooting for like a 200 watt variant and trying to get a little bit lower wattage. But to be honest, as the 5700 XT successor, it's only 5 additional watts to the 225 of the 5700 XT, so we should be getting a pretty decent performance boost bump at the same wattage. We'll talk about that performance per watt in a little bit. Now let's talk performance. If y'all have seen some of my other prediction videos, I like to base my data off of Hardware Unboxed's reviews because they cover a full set of games and they also provide all of the different data for us to look at. And in this particular video, we're focusing on their RTX 3060 Ti video because they have all 18 games at 1440p at our disposal. And then the 6900 XT will give us a kind of like a 5-game average for 4K as well as 1440p. So in this first chart, we're only going to be looking at AMD's cards because I want to show you guys just how well the performance scales per game for AMD before we put them side by side with Nvidia's cards. Now, I'm not going to be talking to each of these games specifically, but I do want to highlight some of the games I test on a regular basis, but you can pause the video and take a look at these numbers as you see fit. So Assassin's Creed Valhalla is going to be running at right at 71 FPS at 1440p, and I think this is ultra high, which is a really good improvement compared to the 5700 XT. And sure enough, we do see some pretty decent frame rate scaling going up the offerings from AMD. Doom Eternal, wow, 242 FPS at ultra high, or I think it's ultra nightmare, at 1440p. If you've got a high refresh rate 1440p monitor, you will be in good shape there. Gears 5, I have a video here on the channel where I talk about Gears 5 as a benchmark and why I like it, and sure enough, we are getting right at 91 FPS using the ultra preset. We are getting some pretty good performance. Lastly here, Metro Exodus. This is a stunning game. I've done a lot of work on this one, comparing the 6900 XT versus the RTX 3080, and I'm primarily focused on the ray tracing perspective here. So at 130 FPS, we probably will see above 60 FPS once we enable ray tracing. Again, hit the bell icon and subscribe to the channels. That way you can take a look at my AMD versus NVIDIA ray tracing performance analysis. Moving right along. I think this is the last chart. Yeah, we're getting towards the latter third of the games. Rainbow Six Siege, you're going to be able to play pretty much any esports title at 1440p and high refresh rates with this 6700 XT. Unfortunately though, Watch Dogs Legions, it is a more NVIDIA-centric game, but man, we are only able to hit right at 62 FPS. That's not a lot of margin left for like 1% low performance, or if you're going to be playing any other graphically intensive game. So hopefully, you know, we can dial down the settings and get better performance. But that's pretty much the lowest, well, except for Flight Simulator. I think that was like FPS of 40 or whatever. But other than that, let's finally take a look at the 18 game average. Now, what I did, Hardware Unboxed, when they calculate their average, they like to do an arithmetic mean in order to get a higher than expected FPS average. And the reason for that is because games like Doom Eternal and Rainbow Six Siege, since they have really high FPS values, they're going to be artificially increasing the overall average value by quite a bit. So what I did is I did a geometric mean, and that's going to more heavily weight things down towards the lower spectrum to give us a more realistic average of what the frame rate could be. So 109 FPS at 1440p on average is a really solid place to stand. And if you compare that against the 6800 and the 6800 XT, we see some pretty decent scaling. So I think we are on the right track when it comes to performance. So for the next few charts, I wanted to pull up the games I just talked about here, and we're going to be talking about the different metrics I use for validating my performance model to make sure that the frame rates I produced kind of line up with what the other cards are able to do. Now, the first metric I like to look at here is going to be called frame rate per teraflop, which is a metric that shows how well an engine is able to use a particular architecture's teraflop number in order to produce performance. Now, this is not a good metric when you're comparing, you know, AMD versus NVIDIA, or even AMD older generation versus newer generation, because architectures change, lower level stuff changes as well. So within the latest cards from AMD, I should be able to use this to make sure that my performance numbers are on track. Let's take a look at the chart. And of course, as we're at the lower spec graphics cards, they are able to produce more frame rate per teraflop just because they don't have as many teraflops available to them. And on the inverse, as you get more teraflops available to you, you start to get a little wasteful when it comes to producing performance. But for our purposes here, the actual number is not important. What's important here is the trend. We do see a pretty good downward curve for the different graphics cards, and it is consistent across the different games. So I think we are on a good track for being accurate with our predictions. Now, the next metric is my average performance per watt. Now, this is not how AMD calculates their performance per watt improvement number. We'll talk about that shortly. This is just the raw calculation of FPS divided by total board power. And I'm only doing this to mainly, again, see the trends of the different graphics cards to make sure that I'm not coming up with like too optimistic of an FPS or too pessimistic of a wattage usage. So let's take a look at the chart. Now, what I like to see here, and I think confirms my model very well, is as we have lower performance per watt metrics, the range of values for the 6000 series GPUs, it does start to shrink. And we especially see that with like Watch Dogs Legions as well as Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But as the performance per watt improves, we start to see that range increase. So Doom Eternal shows that the engine scales very well and is very efficient when it comes to producing FPS. And what I really like and find interesting here is the RX 6800. It is a very well-suited graphics card when it comes to performance efficiency. Next, I wanted to look at the actual performance difference when compared to the 5700 XT at 1440p, because if you've watched some of the Cortex videos, Red Gaming Tech, we've heard that the RX 6700 XT is going to be right around 20 to 25% better than the 5700 XT. Of course, that number includes all resolutions, all games. So, what I'm showing you here doesn't exactly match that, but it does give you an indicator at 1440p what we should expect. And sure enough, 18 game average all the way over there on the right. We are a little bit higher than what we expect from the other leaks, and there are several games that are showing better performance than what's predicted. Doom Eternal, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and ironically, Watch Dogs Legion all seem to be higher performance improvement than the 5700 XT and the leaks. But Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Gears 5, and Metro Exodus all fit that 20 to 25-ish performance improvement. All right, lastly, this is comparing the actual AMD calculated performance per watt improvement based on the white paper that we showed. I'll put a link up at the top right if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But what I find interesting here is the 5700 XT is at 225 watts and the 6700 XT is at 230 watts. So you would think on average for all resolutions and all games, you should be getting a 50% performance improvement. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case because that particular spec is based on the 6800 XT, not the 6700 XT. But I wanted to show this to you guys so y'all can kind of get a good glimpse of like what the landscape looks like. But interesting here, we're seeing ranges anywhere between 20% and 33% performance per watt improvement compared to the 5700 XT, which I still think is pretty good. Now that we've kind of confirmed through all the different parametrics I collect that our 6700 XT model matches up with our expectations, let's finally pit it up against the RTX 3060 Ti as well as the RTX 3070, and we're going to look at these all of the different games from the 18 game suite that Hardware Unboxed produces and just see how it compares against all the different games. Now, what I find interesting is that with AMD-centric games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, we clearly see the performance improvements with the 6700 XT when compared to the RTX 3070. But when we go to more neutral games like the Doom Eternal, we do see that the 6700 XT and the 3070, they kind of match up when it comes to performance. Also hits that with the F1 2020. Going to the next chart though, we do start to see the RX 6700 XT start to slide behind, especially in games like Hitman 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Metro Exodus. But of course, Gears 5, we do see the slight performance win for the RX 6700 XT. Going into the last chart, again, esports is not a problem with the 6700 XT, but if you're wanting to make sure you've got that extra margin, the 3070 is going to be the clear winner here. But unfortunately, Wolfenstein Youngblood, again, a very NVIDIA heavy game, that RTX 3060 Ti does manage to take the win, but we are still getting above 140 FPS in that title. Now let's take a look at the 18 game average. Again, this is the geo-mean average taking all the games into account. And what I like to see here is that the RX 6700 XT does manage to be within just a few frames of the RTX 3070, and it does manage to get the best out of the RTX 3060 Ti. I believe that's what, 8 FPS? It might not be a lot, but it is still a better card. And of course, the RX 6800 is still practically leagues ahead of other cards. So if you're interested in more frame rate, definitely going with the higher end graphics card makes more sense. Now lastly, let's take a quick glimpse at the different resolutions that we can expect from these cards. Now the 1080p data is the arithmetic mean produced by Hardware Unboxed, and we see that unfortunately the RX 6700 XT manages to be about 7 FPS lower than the RTX 3070, but optimistically, when we go to 1440p, it's only sluggish by about 4 FPS. Again, this is a 5 game average based on that 6900 XT review, so our numbers aren't directly comparable to what I just showed you. And lastly, at 4K, we don't have access to the RTX 3060 Ti data, but we still are able to hit on average right at 65 FPS with the RX 6700 XT. So overall performance, I'm really pleased with how well the RX 6700 XT should perform, especially when it's compared to the RTX 3070 and the lower spec RTX 3060 Ti. Clearly the 6700 XT will be a really good 1440p card, and if you're interested in trying out 4K gameplay, you should be okay with, dialing back the settings, maybe not ultra high, but down to like high or medium in order to get playable 4K performance. But this also begs the question about price. Now, I've taken that 1440p 18 game average, and I'm going to be using that compared to both the MSRP as well as the average street price for AIB partner models when looking at Best Buy. Now, some of the AIB cards, they can get really pricey when it comes to all their designs and heatsinks and stuff. So I'm going to be looking at cards like the EVGA XC3 Black. Gigabyte's got a really value-oriented, plastic backplate and all that stuff. So I'm going to be using those two graphics cards in order to get the AIB price as well as the air quote MSRP provided by the AMD and NVIDIA. Now, unfortunately, I pre-recorded this part before the press event, but word on the street is the RX 6700 XT is going to be coming in at $479 or $499. Now, I will pin a comment down below with what the official specs and costs are going to be, but for our video here, we're going to be using that $479 metric. Now, here we've got in the dark green bar, that's going to be your cost per frame at 1440p, using the MSRP as the advertised price. And then the light green is going to be the current cost per frame when factoring in the cheapest AIB model that's available. Usually, that cheapest value model is going to be right about $100 more expensive than the MSRP. And of course, these prices fluctuate day to day, vendor to vendor. Here we've got the 6700 XT coming in right at $5.33 per frame. Now, that is actually matching the RTX 3070 in this particular instance. But again, this is at $479, guys. This is not the $499. If you factor in that extra 20 bucks, clearly the RTX 3070 is going to have the better value, especially price to performance. And I even think those are the exact same costs at MSRP. Some of the AIB costs could be different. Again, check your e-tailers and all that. But if the MSRP is going to be the additional cost, I don't really think the 6700 XT is going to be a great choice for value, especially if you consider the RTX cards have DLSS, they have better ray tracing performance, and overall, I think the design is just a little bit better with those types of graphics cards. So putting this all into perspective, if you're not really interested in ray tracing or DLSS, I think any of these graphics cards we talked about today, the RTX 3060 Ti, 3070, or the brand new 6700 XT, I think they're all going to be pretty decent for 1440p gameplay. And I would even argue that, going with the 6700 XT is going to give you a little extra buffer when it comes to higher refresh rates, or if you're going to do 1080p, I think you're going to get better performance when compared to the RTX 3060 Ti. But then, if you're going to compare the 3070 and the 6700 XT to each other, it really just depends. If you don't care about ray tracing or DLSS, you could buy either graphics card and be happy with it. But I honestly think that there's better value with the RTX card. You even get the latest NVENC if you're going to be streaming. So to me, I don't think the 6700 XT, for me personally, is going to be the better card to buy. But if you're just looking for a graphics card to buy, I think both of them perform admirably well. They both trade hits in particular games, and I think both will satisfy you going forward. But guys, what do you think about these predictions? Do you think they're on point? Do you think I missed something? Let me know down in the comments of what you think or what graphics card you're looking for. And if you guys hop on over to my Discord, we do have a role for deal alerts for when any of these cards hit the market. I like to tag the group. That way they know to go and join the shuffle or all that stuff. So make sure you join the Discord, follow me on Twitter @TheTurk, and of course hit subscribe down below. We've got these glorious cards behind me. That's the 6900 XT. We're actually benchmarking the 3070 at the moment. So we got a whole bunch of new content coming down the way, especially that AMD versus NVIDIA ray tracing video. That's gonna be pretty cool. But again, guys, thank you for watching the video. I hope you all have a great night. We'll catch you in the next one. See ya!